Welcome to Scale Model Basics. I'm Tim Kidwell. Let's talk about eliminating ejector pin marks. Now, if you don't know what an ejector pin mark is, they are created when the parts are actually being molded at the factory. So your molds come together, the styrene is shot in, and then the molds come apart. And as those parts are cooling, there are little push rods or ejector pins that will hit a part or multiple parts and push the entire sprue out of the mold and then drop the mold into a conveyor or whatever else. Now, there are basically two ways ejector pin marks end up looking on a part. The first way is that the ejector pin will hit the part and leave a slight indentation in the part. And then the other way is that it might hit the part but not really hard, and it will leave instead a raised area from the surrounding area on the part. So there are a couple of different ways to tackle these, and what we're going to need are some sanding sticks in a variety of grits. You're also going to need sanding sponges or sandpaper. You're going to want a number 11 blade, and you're going to need some modeling putty. Let's start with raised ejector pin marks. Now, as you can see here on this part, which is the back of a Volkswagen van, you can see we've got 6 ejector pin marks, these large ones down here, and then these 2 smaller ones up here, and all of them are raised. And what you're going to want to do is take your number 11 blade and carefully come in and start to eliminate that mark, okay? And just go slowly and carefully, and you can use the sharp side of your blade to do this, or if you're more comfortable with scraping, you can come in with the back side of your blade and just scrape along the top of those ejector pin marks. And what you want to do is just slowly work those down toward the surface. Now, when you have most of that pin mark eliminated, what you can then do is come in with a sanding stick and begin to sand it smooth and try and eliminate as much of the mark as you can. And here's the thing. You can come in and you can feel over the top of that whether or not that mark is still there. We can still see kind of an outline, which is telling me that it still has a ridge. And just running my finger over that, I can feel that there's a little bit of a hump there. So you can always come back in and work that a little bit more to eliminate that mark. And then follow up with successively finer grits. Go slow, go carefully, and that way you'll have a nice finish when you're done getting rid of that ejector pin mark. For this second example, you're going to see on this car hood that we have 4 ejector pin marks, and they're all depressions. Now, you might find that there are some raised portions around those depressions, sort of like flash. And if you do see that, what you want to do is you want to come in with maybe a medium sanding stick and just go over it very lightly, just to kind of try to knock those down. If you can, if they're large enough, you can try to scrape them or cut them off with a knife. But in this case, they're not very big. And all I'm trying to accomplish is just to get them knocked down. Okay, so then the next step, once you've done that, will be to come in and fill those marks with putty. And I like this applicator because it's very pinpoint. Now remember, putty will shrink as it dries. So you are going to want to use more than what you need. and actually having it come out of the ejector pin mark a little bit to the surrounding area is not a bad thing. So there are the 4 ejector pin marks. Now all we need to do is just wait for this to dry, and then we'll come back in and we'll sand it down. After your putty is dry, the next step is to come in with sandpaper or with sanding sponges and then begin sanding that putty down to the surrounding plastic, and using gradually finer and finer grits to smooth that putty out and feather it in to the surrounding plastic. And the reason why you want to use sandpaper or a sanding sponge instead of a sanding stick is that these are more forgiving than a sanding stick, because they are squishy. And you want to not gouge out that area with the putty, but you want to feather it in and make it smooth to the rest of the plastic around it. At this point on this particular ejector pin mark, you can see it's still, you can see it because there's a difference between the color of the putty and the color of the plastic, but we've gone through the different grits of sanding sponge and this has been sanded smooth. All you got to do then is follow the same procedure for the rest of those ejector pin marks. Now, the real test is when you go ahead to paint, you hit it with primer, and then you see if there's a difference. Here's the nice thing. If you can still tell that there's a difference between the surrounding plastic and where that ejector pin mark is, you can come back in and you can repeat the process. You can go ahead and go through your sanding, or if maybe it's not quite as filled in as what you thought it was before you primed it, you can go ahead, put more putty in there, and then sand it smooth again. One other thing, I've used Vallejo plastic putty. There are a number of other putties that you could use, and a lot of modelers, you can see by this particular tube, including us, like to use glazing and spot putty. Now, you can apply this in much the same way that you can other modeling putties. It dries down or cures to about the consistency of plastic, and it's a red in color, so you're going to know where you've put it. Here's the thing about this particular product: it's designed to feather very well. It is it's stinky, so don't use it in a place that you don't have good ventilation, but it does work very well for these sorts of corrections on your models, filling in gaps, filling in ejector pin marks. So if you don't want to use a water-based or another model-specific putty, you can always go to Bondo glazing and spot putty. Thank you for watching Scale Model Basics. We'll see you next time.